Uh, Thank you so much for joining us today. Here is our this semester's research brown bag. Today, we are thrilled to have Professor Jules White with us, and we also have another research domain talk lined up in May with Professor Nicola Plass from Australia. And here we have, we want to use like 1 minute to do a quick promotion here. This year is our second annual Responsible Innovation and Entrepreneurship Conference. And our theme is focused on responsible AI and digital ethics, methods and measures to anticipate and mitigate harms. So the conference will be held on April 19th and 20th in San Francisco. We wholeheartedly invited all you to join us. You can scan the QR code on the slides here to explore our website. This year, we have amazing lineup of speakers from Stanford University, Salesforce, OpenAI, Responsible Innovation Labs. We also have, scholars from King's College of London, Keele University, San Francisco State University. We have 2 full-day workshops, keynotes, and networking sessions. So please join us if you have time. And now, it is my great pleasure to introduce Professor Jules White to have his talk on prompt engineering for ChatGPT. Professor Jules White is a professor of computer science from Vanderbilt University. He's also director of Vanderbilt's initiative on the future of learning and generative AI. He also serves as a senior advisor to the chancellor for generative AI in education and enterprise solutions. Professor White actually created one of the very first online classes for prompt engineering. Actually, that's how I, get to know him. I'm one of his students there. And, this is the very first one. And this course has more than 160,000 enrolls there. You will see like how popular this course is. And I started my course like last semester. I learned a great deal from there. I highly recommend this course to all you who, want to know more about like how to converse with ChatGPT and how to, tell ChatGPT to do the things, you want it to do. Also, he just created a new course there, like it's about ChatGPT vision, like seeing the world through generative AI. It's amazing. So if you have time, check it out. And also, Professor White is a very productive scholar. He published more than 160 papers. Wow. I wonder how you can find time to do this. He's also a National Science Foundation Career Award recipient. So Dr. White's research focuses on large language models such as ChatGPT, cybersecurity, and software engineering in domains ranging from healthcare to manufacturing. So I'm really excited to have Professor White to be here with us today. And now I will stop sharing my screen and let Professor White take away. Welcome. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you. Well, thank you for having me. And I'm going to go ahead and get my slides up here. So if my slides pulled up okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, yeah, thank you so much. This is a topic that I care a lot about and I'm very passionate about. And part of the reason that I tell people that I'm passionate about it is that if you had stopped me on the street November 1st of 2022 and you'd said, this thing called ChatGPT is going to come out at the end of the month, and here's what it's going to do, and they described all the things it was going to be able to do, I would have looked at him and I told him, that's nice, but I'm a computer science professor, and trust me, that's not going to exist in my lifetime. I will not be alive to see something of that capability. And then a month later, I was totally wrong, and ChatGPT came out, and it absolutely was sort of mind-blowing to me because it was sort of a fundamentally new way of doing computing. So we've had, for a long time, we've been, we've had Moore's law, we've had increases in computing, but we've always done things with certain operations like plus and minus and if, else, all these basic operations. And basically what I realized when I started looking at this was a completely new way of doing computing where we had fundamentally different operations that we could use that were in some ways much more powerful, but we couldn't do some of the basic things necessarily the same way anymore. But it gave us this totally new avenue and way of doing computing. And I got really excited about it. And then I went and looked in the news and started talking to people, and everybody was talking about student cheating and Terminator, neither of which made sense to me because I thought this is fundamentally the most important advance from a computing perspective of my lifetime. And why is everybody talking about student cheating and Terminator? This is absolutely crazy. So I want to just kind of walk you through sort of the sort of capabilities and thinking about it as not just a alternative to internet search, which is sometimes how people talk about it, but really thinking about it as a fundamental new way of doing computing and how transformative that new approach to computing is going to be. Now, thank you so much for mentioning my course. I created a very early course on prompt engineering. I've created a number of follow-on courses as well that have about 300,000 people in them total now. That original course has about 230,000. And one of the things that's been really exciting from it is that people reach back out to me and tell me how they're using it in industry. And so some of the material and things that you're going to see today are really inspired by what I've learned from students in this course who reach back out and say, this is how we're using it in investment banking, or this is how we're going to use it in healthcare and these types of things. And so then that inspires a lot of the examples I present. So to get started, I think it's always helpful to just have a basic mental model of generative AI. And I always like to use the model of text messaging. So, we're all familiar with text messaging. You go in and you type in a text message and you send it off to a friend, and then your friend can text you back a reply, or they can, take a selfie of themselves or take a picture of something around them and send it back to you, or they can go and take a video and send it back to you. And just like that, generative AI, you can go and type in a message and send it off, but rather than sending it off to a friend, you send it off to AI, and AI can either text you back text, or can send you back a photograph or video or audio. Now, one of the differences is that the messages that you type in and send to the AI are now called prompts. And the responses that you get back are called either a response or output, something like that. So these are all examples of prompts that you could send. Now, if you had the right friend, you could send them the message, write a poem about the French Revolution, and they could text you back something. And if you had the right friend, you could send something like create a Pokemon game for my child, and they could respond. And generative AI is like the friend that will always respond. No matter what you send, it will try to respond, and it will try to do it very convincingly. And so that's both a sort of pro and sometimes viewed by people as a con of this technology, but I view it as a huge pro of the technology. It's a fundamental capability that it will respond pretty much no matter what you give it. So these are all examples of prompts. None of them are particularly good prompts, but they're prompts that you could send to something like ChatGPT. The first thing that I think is helpful when you start thinking about these models is to not think about them as something that you go and ask for an answer and get a response, and that's it. You see a lot of this type of thinking, and particularly you used to see it in the news a lot, where they would say, well, I asked ChatGPT this question, it gave me this bad answer, and therefore the tool itself is fundamentally flawed. Like, these models are never going to solve important problems because it can't even answer this basic question perfectly. And thinking about things of asking it a question and getting an answer is not the way you want to use this tool. You really want to use it and start thinking about performing computing or solving problems or developing content through a conversation. And when you're going to have a conversation, you're going to go and you're sort of iteratively work on the topic and the content. And you're going to expect that it's going to take a while to refine it and get to a final answer or solution. Now, I also say this is kind of like if you have an intern that's really smart, you wouldn't give them one description of the task and expect them to come back with a perfect answer the first time, or a perfect paper, or a perfect analysis. You would expect there would be some back and forth. And these tools are exactly the same. And that's how you can use them, is to think about it as computing iteratively in a conversation. So I always start with this example because I think it's an example that's approachable and is also simultaneously something that would be extremely difficult for a human to do. And that example is, please create a meal plan for my family. It is based on a fusion of food from Ethiopia and Uzbekistan. I want to eat keto and up to 2,000 calories per day. Pick dishes where the ingredients are easy to get from an average US grocery store. Now, I don't know about where you are, because people are all across the US and also internationally. But in Nashville, it would be very hard for me to find somebody that could do this. And it would be extremely difficult for me to find somebody to do this as fast as ChatGPT is going to do it. And I don't even think I could find that person. And I bet I couldn't find them in the United States. So what does ChatGPT say? And this is 3.5 from back in February of 23. It says, here's a sample meal plan that combines flavors from Ethiopia and Uzbekistan while also being keto friendly and within a 2,000 calorie per day limit. Breakfast, scrambled eggs with sauteed onions, tomatoes, and Ethiopian berbere spice mix. And then notice what it does. In parentheses, it says made with chili powder, paprika, garlic powder, ginger, cumin, and coriander. And it's signaling these are ingredients that you can get at an average US grocery store. Now, we didn't really have anything in computing that could solve this problem before ChatGPT, and nothing that could approach the quality of solution that it just provided. So if you look at the complexity of the task we're asking it to perform, it's really high, and it has to understand things about like what would be an average US grocery store and what might be there. And it then is signaling that in its response. Now, a lot of people would then look at this, and I still talk to people all the time who would look at this and say, look at what it's got. You said 2,000 calories per day, and it didn't even give you serving sizes. You can't have 2,000 calorie per day limit if you don't have serving sizes. So this is obviously flawed output. And this is one way of looking at output that comes out of ChatGPT. Now, if we really care about the serving sizes, all we have to do is follow up in the conversation and say, can you give me an approximate serving size for myself for each dish that is within my 2,000 calorie limit? And then it'll come back and say, okay, breakfast, now we're going to do 2 eggs, half a cup of onions, half a cup of tomatoes, 1 teaspoon of berbere spice mix. And there will be lots of people out there who would say, well, you said keto and it says half a cup of onions, and the macronutrients on this are wrong. And then they would argue that it's still producing, bad output and it's all flawed. But what I see is that it's rapidly evolving content, and I could continue to take it in whatever direction I want. And also, more importantly, what we're starting to see is, a lot of people view it kind of like it should only be a one-off. It should get it perfect on the first try. And what I think of is this is kind of like if somebody handed Michelangelo a hammer and he walked up to a stone and he hit the stone once and he looked at the stone and he said, oh, it's not a beautiful sculpture. And he threw the hammer down on the ground and he said, it's a terrible tool. Why would anybody use this? No, Michelangelo is going to take the hammer and he's going to continue to chip away at the stone. And he knows that it takes iteration and refinement to build something beautiful, but also his own skill is equally important. And so both of those come into play. And people sort of forget that when they start working with tools like this. Now, I'm going to continue this conversation, but I'm going to take it in a different direction to kind of show you the flexibility of this new computing capability. So when I thought about this meal plan, one of the things that I thought was, this is exciting. I really want to try this, but my real problem is not serving sizes or macronutrients. It's that I've got a 9-year-old at home. And how am I going to get him to eat this food? Because he's a pretty adventurous eater, but it's always the battle is getting him to try it. If I can just get him to try it, most of the time he'll like it and be excited, and then he'll eat it going forward. But I've got all these completely new dishes, so how am I going to get him to try them? So I thought, well, maybe I can get ChatGPT to help me with this. So I say, my son is 9. Sometimes he won't try new dishes. To make this culinary adventure more fun for him, can you create a short Pokemon battle story to go with each dish? I'll read the stories with him before dinner to get him excited about trying the new food. Make sure the story ends with a cliffhanger that will motivate him to try the food. So, maybe we can find the person who can do that meal plan, but I really challenge you to find the person who can turn around and write Pokemon battle stories to go with each of the recipes. And ChatGPT comes back. Pikachu and his friends were exploring the wilds of Ethiopia when they were suddenly ambushed by a group of sneaky Pokemon thieves. As they raced through the dense jungle, they stumbled upon a hidden cave filled with treasure. And then it goes on to say, in the end, they emerged victorious, but not before the dragon left a fiery spice that imbued their breakfast eggs with a flavorful kick. Can you help Pikachu and his friends defeat the bear dragon and enjoy this spicy breakfast? So it understood the concept of creating a cliffhanger to motivate a 9-year-old to eat the breakfast. Now, some people would argue and say, oh, well, it didn't understand it. Well, whatever it did, it computed an output that has a cliffhanger to motivate a 9-year-old to try the dish. So a lot of people, take issue with the concept of reasoning. And what I want to say is, well, okay, let's think about it in terms of computing, because you gave it a computing task, which is to build some output, and it built the output that fit what you asked. Now, if it understood it or not, who cares? That's a fundamental computing capability that we did not have. We had nothing that could do something like this and this effectively. So that is a new computing capability. If it's based on reasoning or not, less important to me. What's important to me is it's a computing capability that becomes a building block that we can use to solve problems. Now I'm going to take this conversation, I'm going to take it in yet another direction to look at some of the additional computing capabilities within this platform. So I thought, well, what do we do with my son at the dinner table? And I thought, well, he loves to tell us about what he's learning in school. He loves math and he loves to play math games on an iPad. And I thought, wouldn't it be fun if I could create a math game and get ChatGPT to play a math game with it? So I said, I'd like you to play a math game with my 9-year-old to teach him about division with fractions and nutrition. Ask him questions one at a time involving Pokemon in these topics and make it into a game. When he wins, the Pokemon win. And I'm starting to use some of the techniques called prompt engineering, where it's how you structure your language and what you ask in order to get certain types of output. And ChatGPT comes back and it says, question 1, Pikachu and his friends are planning a meal that includes half a cup of cooked rice, but they need to divide it evenly among 3 Pokemon. How much rice will each Pokemon get? And then what does ChatGPT do? It waits, because it either understands the concept of a game and then it's its turn to wait for the response. And then if we go and put in the correct response, which is 1/6, it says, good job, that's correct. It works out the math for my 9-year-old, and then it goes on to asking the next question. Ash wants to make a smoothie. Now we think about asking ChatGPT questions, telling it what to do, but it can also ask us questions and respond to our answers. It can also ask us to go and collect information for it, give it to it, and then it can respond and reason based on what we've provided back to it. And so it's much more complex than just a tool that we go and ask it a question and see what the response is. It's not like internet search. It's a fundamentally new thing and capability that we have. Now, it would go on asking him questions as long as we wanted. And if you just think about it from an educational perspective, the ability to go and create on-demand educational content, quizzes, interactive games, all kinds of things like that is a fundamentally new computing technique that we didn't have. And if I wanted as a computer scientist to go and do something like that for my class before, that would have taken me a vast amount of programming effort to do. And I still would have had to go and create the content, like all of these, questions about, fractions and nutrition and Pokemon. And what I did is in one paragraph, I've dynamically created a personalized game for my son based on particular content that he's interested in, but also bringing in concepts that are relevant to his learning. Incredibly difficult to do any other way. And then as a computer scientist, I thought, well, it's great that he can play this game directly inside of ChatGPT. Can you go and create code for it? And so using some of my domain knowledge, I just said, let's create code for this in Python, which is a programming language. And I gave it some information about what I wanted because of my domain expertise. And it goes and it generates the code, which is a snippet of it. And then this is the game running in a browser that he could play on an iPad or play on a laptop. And we started at the very beginning with just this simple task of go and create a, well, not a simple task, but this task of go and create a meal plan. And then through a conversation, we evolved the meal plan. We built Pokemon battle stories to motivate a 9-year-old to eat the dishes. We generated an interactive math game, and then we turned it into code. And that was all through this fundamentally new type of computing that we have that we've never had before. Nothing that we had in computing could do what we just did in that conversation. And that's a new capability. Now, what generative AI is going to do is give us new capabilities, but it's also going to change our interface to computing. And I want to kind of give you a look at what that's going to look like in the future. So this is the Vanderbilt travel and business expense policy. This is a 17-page PDF. And I always joke that I've had lots of expenses rejected because of it, and yet I've never bothered to actually read the policy in its entirety. And that used to be true, but I've actually gone and read it with ChatGPT. And so if you upload this to ChatGPT, and some of the slides and things, I put these slides together, the interfaces and the UIs to these things keep changing. So it looks different today if you go into ChatGPT. But I uploaded this business expense policy in PDF, and I said, read the provided document so you can answer questions about it. And then I follow up with a question that looks like the questions that I actually ask, which is, let's assume I'm in a foreign country traveling in a taxi and it breaks down on the way to an important meeting. Can I get reimbursed if I pay someone to drive me on the back of their motorcycle to the meeting? And ChatGPT says, based on the information provided in the document. So there's this misconception that in order to use your information, your private business information, or whatever it is, you have to either retrain the model from scratch to incorporate that information, or you have no option, right? It stopped training in some point in 2023. Therefore, it doesn't have updated information, and it certainly doesn't have your private information that you haven't made public, and therefore it can't reason on it. Well, that's not true. Any information you want it to reason about, you simply give to it in a prompt or through some other mechanism. And so it says, based on the information provided in the document, the key points relevant to the question are as follows. The university requires travelers to select the most reasonable and economical form of transportation. That's true. That's a direct statement out of the document. Non-conventional transportation options are not explicitly mentioned in the policy. That is also true. Nowhere in the policy does it mention riding on the back of a motorcycle, which it has retermed non-conventional transportation. And then Vanderbilt does not have a separate policy on ride sharing. That is also true, and that is a direct statement out of the policy. It says we do not have a separate policy on ride sharing. And it says, given these points, it seems plausible that in an emergency situation where no other reasonable and economical form of transportation is available, the cost of transportation by a private citizen's motorcycle might be considered an allowable expense. However, the university's policy does not explicitly state this, and reimbursement may be subject to review. And so I actually presented this example to the university financial managers, and nobody complained, and they all sort of nodded their heads. And so I consider it fact-checked and accurate. So, it's absolutely able to go and incorporate new information on the fly and reason on it. And that's when you start thinking about it in terms of computing. It's kind of like a CPU. You go and you give it information and operations, and inside the CPU, that data and that set of operations are applied, and then you get an output. And that's exactly what's happening here. It's taking in information, it's taking in instructions, and it's going and producing an output. Now, it's one thing to be able to, go and cite from a document to answer questions. It's a whole nother thing to be able to understand the concepts in the document well enough to apply them as rules to something else. And so I gave it a rental car receipt, and I said, please analyze the attached receipt and let me know if it complies. So this is just further down in the conversation. And it comes back, and I want to draw your attention to this highlighted area at the bottom, the collision damage waiver. It says for domestic travel, The CDW should be declined as rental vehicles are fully insured through Vanderbilt's insurance portfolio. The receipt shows a charge for CDW, which may not comply if this is domestic travel. And so if I had to go and write software to do what we just did, it would take me like a team of programmers, probably years, to get something of this level of sophistication that could take an arbitrary receipt and do what it just did. And all I did to get to this is I gave it the document, I gave it the receipt, and I said, let me know if it complies. And it's gone and it's understood the content of the document well enough. And you can argue about understood. It's computed, or whatever you want to call it, but we've created computing basically that can go and read the travel expense and say, no, it doesn't comply. This is the instructional enrollment report that's put out by the registrar at Vanderbilt. And it's basically 20 pages of tables that look like this, that describe different aspects of enrollment across the university. Now, before, if I wanted to go and do some type of research or work with this data, I would have to go and get this PDF and copy and paste out of this PDF, probably into Excel. And then, go and build some charts, do some type of analyses, with all that data and manual labor that I'd put into this. Now, I went and uploaded this to ChatGPT, and I told it to do something simple. Extract each page of the PDF as plain text. And it goes and extracts all the pages as plain text. And now we had tools that could do something like this before. But then I told it, take one of the pages basically and turn it into an Excel file. And it goes and it looks at the page, looks at the Excel data, or looks at the tabular data, and turns it into an Excel file. And then I can click on the link and download that Excel file. That is really transformative. I could have done that before as a programmer, but it would have taken a huge amount of effort and been really tough. And it would have been really tough to come up with a general solution that would work for arbitrary PDFs. Now, the interesting thing is I don't even actually need to take it and create the Excel file anymore, because just as a follow-up in the conversation, I can say something like display 4 interesting visualizations of this data, and it will go and generate visualizations. Now, notice what I didn't tell it. I didn't tell it the axes. I didn't tell it the colors. I didn't tell it what data I wanted it to look at, the types of charts. I just said, give me 4 interesting visualizations, and it went in and generated the visualizations. And then I thought about it, and I thought, well, if I was creating all these visualizations, probably the real reason I'm creating is to go give a presentation. So wouldn't it be great if it could help me create the slides? So I uploaded my slide template to ChatGPT, and I said, save each visualization as an image, then insert each of these images as separate slides into the attached PowerPoint. And then I gave it some information about how to format the slides. And I basically told it, put a text box next to each visualization that describes what's in the visualization. And ChatGPT goes off, it works for a while, and then it generates a link to a PowerPoint presentation. And if you open up the PowerPoint presentation, this is the presentation that it created. You can see that it's my slide template, and you can see all of the visualizations laid out as separate slides. And then next to each visualization, we have a text box describing what it is. The heat map visualizes the correlation between different enrollment categories. Now, if I didn't like these visualizations, I could have gone back and iterated and told it, no, do this type of visualization, or filter the data this way, or change the colors to be black and gold for Vanderbilt, or whatever I wanted to do. And I could have really quickly iterated and done these things. Nothing that we had from a computing perspective could do something like that before these tools came out. Now, people get excited when they see the PowerPoint presentation created. I don't know if it's because people just all universally hate messing around with text boxes and things in PowerPoint and font sizes and getting it all straightened out. But something absolutely mind-blowing took place in that conversation. And you probably didn't catch it, but I want to show it to you. So I want you to imagine that you're in your backyard and you've picked up a shovel and you're getting ready to dig a hole. And right before you go to dig a hole, your shovel looks down and sees that there's a rock in the way. And your shovel jumps out of your hands and your shovel builds itself a pickaxe. Your shovel uses the pickaxe to break up the rock, and then your shovel jumps back into your hands and you continue digging. That is, your tool went and built itself a tool and used its own tool in order to help solve a problem. And then the tool got back in your hands. Now, if you think about it, we think of gorillas going off and putting blades of grass into like termite mounds as being like state of the art in other things other than humans building tools. And people get excited when they see things in the animal kingdom of like, examples like that of tool building. Well, as I went through that conversation, ChatGPT was building tools for itself all along the way to help me solve my overall problem. Now, if you go and use ChatGPT today, it looks different than this. But back in the day when I did this, I like it because it was this big gray box. It was really obvious that something was happening. Now it's a little more hidden. But that big gray box right there is ChatGPT building itself a tool. And if you click on that and expand on it, the tool it built was software. So on demand, it saw that I wanted it to save each of these images or save each visualization as an image and then start putting them into a PowerPoint presentation. And it realized that it had to go and generate code to do that. So it wrote Python code to perform that operation. It executed the Python code. It looked at the output, decided if it was correct or not. Once it decided it was correct, it then gave me a link to the file that its code had created. So the tool itself was building tools all along the way and using its own tools in order to help me accomplish an overall goal. That's fundamentally game-changing in computing. So generative AI is going to completely transform how we interact with computing and the capabilities that it has. So what do we need to learn to go and interact with these new tools? It's just a bunch of text, right? Well, no, that's wrong, unfortunately, because a lot of people have this perspective that it's like internet search. It's a text box that you might have seen on a search engine. So you go in and type in what you want, and it gives you facts. And that's not what it does. These tools were not designed to give you facts out. Now, they're working really hard to try to make them only give you facts because that's how people want to use it a lot of times. But that's not what they were designed to do. At the same time, people have this belief that if you go and express something in text, it should be perfect and get the perfect answer, the first time, no matter what. And that's also not correct. How you express and word your problem or your instructions really matter. And so you have to learn how to go and interact with these models. So I want to give you some intuition about how these models were built and why that's important. So basically, these models were taught to predict the next word in a sentence. So they would have shown it something like Mary had a little, and they'd try to get it to predict lamb. And then they'd show it Mary had a little lamb, and they'd try to get it to predict its. Then they'd have Mary little lamb its. They'd try to get it to predict fleece. And so basically what's happening is it's learning how the patterns on the left-hand side influence what the next word should be in the sentence. Now, the left-hand side is essentially your prompt. And then the right-hand side is the first word of output. And then they take that word of output and they add it back to the left-hand side and predict the next word. And then add that word back and predict the next word. And they keep doing this word by word, essentially, to predict what the output should be. So what it's really learning to pay attention to is how patterns in the prompt that you're putting in should influence the output. And it really cares about patterns. So one of our sort of research focuses here at Vanderbilt is on prompt patterns. Basically, what are the patterns in the language that these tools respond to? How do we think about those in terms of like building blocks that we can teach people who can then go and use them to innovate within their domain? Now, prompt patterns sound complex, but we use patterns all the time in language. And so a simple example of this is a formal letter. If you write a formal letter, you say, "Dear so-and-so, comma." And the dear has a specific purpose to indicate respect. And then you have the person's name to indicate who it's to. And then the comma separate that from the rest of the body of the letter. And so that pattern is really easy to understand, but it's really important. And you use it all the time when you're writing letters. And prompt patterns are kind of like that. If you know some of these basic building blocks, then you become very, powerful with using these tools, and also gives you new ways of thinking about how to solve problems with generative AI. So I'm going to give you one of my very favorite patterns because it's so wildly different from anything we did in computing before this. And that's the persona pattern. So in the real world, we know how to solve problems by going and finding the person or organization that can solve the problem for us or tell us the answer. So if I have a nutrition question, I go find a nutritionist and I ask them the question. I don't know how they're going to arrive at the answer. I don't know what their answer is going to look like. I just know they're the right person to go to. Or if I have a question about my taxes, I go talk to the IRS. And I don't know what the IRS is going to say to me. I just know that they can provide the answer. So persona pattern is basically this in an LLM, in a generative AI tool. We say act as some persona, like act as a nutritionist or act as the IRS. And it completely changes the reasoning and output and the way these tools respond. So I'm going to give you an example of this that's close to home. So my wife is a speech language pathologist and she works for the school system. And she tests kids typically when they're 3 before they go into kindergarten to determine if they have special needs. And so she'll do that testing and then she'll write an assessment. And so I'm going to say, act as a speech language pathologist. I'm going to tell you what a 3-year-old said and you'll write an assessment for me. The child said, I need way boy. So I tried to think about what my son sounded like at that time and capture it in text. So what does ChatGPT say? Based on the provided speech sample, it appears the child may be experiencing some phonological and articulation errors, which are common in children around this age. The child's utterance appears to have errors in consonant production and possibly some difficulty with syllable structure. It seems that the child is having difficulty with the production of some consonant sounds, specifically the N and L sounds. The child said mead instead of need and woy instead of toy, assuming the intended words for need and toy. Then it goes on and it says syllable structure. It is possible the child intended to say play, but produced way instead, which suggests a substitution of the initial consonant cluster PL with a single consonant W. This could be an example of a simplification process called cluster reduction. Now, notice what I didn't ask it for. I didn't ask it for cluster reduction, syllable structure, utterance, any of these things. I just said act as a speech language pathologist, and it completely changed the type of output that it gave me. And so suddenly, we now have a new computing tool where one of our building blocks, one of our fundamental operations in that tool is act as this persona, act as the IRS, act as a speech language pathologist, act as a computer that's been the victim of a cyber attack. And it completely changes how it reasons and how it outputs. That is a new building block in computing, a new operation that we never had before. Nothing close. Now, these new building blocks are really interesting because not only are they unique and really powerful capabilities that we've never had, but they're vastly more accessible than anything that we've had in computing before. Before, if you wanted to go learn to really control computing, you had to go take computer science classes, you had to learn to program. And there was a lot of work required to really go and flexibly control computing in these types of ways. Now, with prompts, anybody can go and begin programming. So I'm going to give you an example of this. So I'm going to write a program in a prompt. Now, what I'm not going to do is I'm not going to produce any source code. All of the computing is going to happen with prompts. So my entire program is going to be a series of prompts that are put together. Whenever you generate output, turn it into a comma-separated value list. So comma-separated value list, or CSV, is like essentially represents tabular data where you separate the columns with commas. And this is a file format you could import into Excel. So I've just created a program where whatever I give you as input, you turn it into CSV. Now I'm going to give it my input. So in the next message in the conversation, I just say, my name is Jules White, and I'm teaching a course on prompt engineering. And it outputs name, course, Jules White, prompt engineering. So it has created a CSV file with my input. Now notice what I didn't tell it. I didn't tell it what columns. I didn't tell it how to semantically map between my input and the columns. It just knew what to do and did the right thing. And that's completely different from the way that we've programmed in the past. Part of the reason it took so much effort to learn to program is because you have to learn how to, in gory, explicit detail, specify every last step of the way. You can't leave anything out. And if I had left out something in a traditional program, like what are the names of the columns, it's just not going to work. But here it fills in, it tries to answer no matter what, and that becomes a real benefit when we start thinking about computing. Now, if I decide I don't like the columns, I just go back and I follow up and modify my program. I say from now on, the columns of the comma separated value list should be name, comma, course, comma, role. It says, okay, I understand, your program's modified. And now I give it exactly the same input. My name is Jules White, and I'm teaching a course on prompt engineering. And now it outputs name, comma, course, comma, role, Jules White, comma, prompt engineering, comma, teacher. So I've modified my program. I've rerun it on the exact same input I gave it originally. And now I'm getting the new output that follows the rules that I put into my new program. Now notice I've not written any source code, no programming language, just prompts. Now I can go and I can do something that's even more powerful. I can tap into capabilities that would be extremely difficult to replicate with existing programming languages. So I'm going to say, in addition to whatever I type in, generate additional examples that fit the format of the CSV that I've asked you to produce. This is really hard to do any other way. And I go and give it my original input, which is my name is Jules White, and I'm teaching a course on prompt engineering. And now I have name, comma, course, comma, role, Jules White, prompt engineering teacher, and then I have a whole bunch of fake data generated in it. Doing that any other way with computing and traditional programming languages would be really tough. Now let me show you a more complex program that anybody could write and would be wildly useful probably to you. I'm going to solve the problem of what do I do on Monday when I decided not to check email over the weekend and there's been some long conversation in an email thread and I don't want to have to go and catch up on that thread. And by the way, things like this are now built into like Microsoft Copilot. So I say act as my personal assistant. Whenever I give you a long email thread, you will create a bulleted list of questions and action items for me. The bullets should be numbered. If I type in a number of a bullet, you will summarize the conversation from the email chain around that bullet in one paragraph. If I type in a bullet and a number, you'll draft a reply for me. It says, okay. And then I cut and paste a really long email chain that I had where we were scheduling my generative AI course that I co-taught with 5 other faculty members in the fall. And we were going back and forth about room and all these other things. And it comes back and it summarizes. What are the suggested title and transcript? You know, are the settings for the course entry? And yes is our course scheduling system. And then down at the bottom, it says, have the room and schedule been finalized? Tuesday, Thursday, 9:30 and ESB 048. That's where I taught the class last semester. That was accurate. So I'm going to follow up on that last bullet 1.7. Says, in the suggested email, the team discusses the room and schedule for the course. Sherrod suggests the Tuesday, Thursday, 9:30 a.m. time slot, but the only available room at that time is Engineering and Science Room 048 with a capacity of 60. Jules approves of this room choice, mentioning its good size. And then it says the conversation does not provide any further details on the room and schedule, so it seems that everyone has agreed. And this is exactly what happened. We had like 7, 8 people in this email chain. Registrar was on it, all these people. Sherrod says, hey, looks like we can get this room. I was like, looks good, let's do it. Nobody else responded. All of our other co-instructors were too busy doing other things. And so we won by default. That's the reason we went with that room. And it picked that out of the conversation and recognized that that's what happened. Incredibly sophisticated and difficult to do. And that's just a built-in capability. And now I can go and tap into it with a paragraph of text that describes the program that I want it to run against my email. Now, one of the things that's getting to be exciting about generative AI, and we've seen a lot of releases of new things, one from Google this week, is that, you know, we're not dealing with what we had in the past, which is we had all of these really highly specialized individual models. So if you wanted to do something with text, you went and trained a model that did some natural language processing, and it was probably very narrow in what it could do. And then if you wanted to do something with vision, you would go train some very specialized model to detect some specific vision thing that you wanted. And then if you wanted to do something with, audio, you go and train another highly specialized model. But what's interesting is these models are sort of like generalized models, generalized compute, and they can now understand multiple modalities, not just text, but imagery, video, audio, all kinds of other things. And that creates new paradigms for how we go and interact and solve problems for computing. So I'm going to take a look at GPT-4 Vision, which is probably one of the still the most advanced computer vision models could get on your phone. Now, maybe with Gemini, this has changed with Google. Might have to update this slide soon, but I haven't had enough time to experiment with it. So I was at dinner the other night, and we were eating some Tex-Mex in Nashville. And the person next to me said, I haven't done anything with ChatGPT. And I felt bad for him because then I wouldn't be quiet the rest of the night at the table. And I thought, well, let me show you what ChatGPT can do. And so I took a picture of the table, and this is the picture I took. And I said, who needs a refill? And ChatGPT said, it looks like the glass with ice water is still fairly full, while the beer bottle seems to be nearly empty. So someone might want to refill on beer soon. Now I want to take you back to this image. We just solved a very tough problem in computer vision with a photo and a question. If I'd wanted to do this in the past with computer vision, I would have had to, one, drink a lot of water and a lot of beer, because I would have had to drink water, set it down on the table, drink a beer on the table, set it down, say this one's half full, this one's, plenty, doesn't need a refill. And I would have had to go and label like needs refill, doesn't refill, need refill. I'd have to do this thousands of times in order to train a model that could detect, refills. And it probably would not do it nearly as accurately as we just did with ChatGPT and GPT-4 Vision. So with just a question and a photograph, we've essentially done the equivalent of what we would have required going and training a totally new computer vision model, building a totally new computer vision system from scratch. And then because I was, blabbering on with him about, ChatGPT and GPT-4 Vision, the waitress had walked up, and I thought, this will be fun. I can get ChatGPT to help me order. So I took a picture of the menu. This is the picture I took. And I said, I'm feeling indecisive and out of time. The waitress is here. Everyone is waiting on me. I need a quick keto option. And ChatGPT comes back and it says, go for the grilled chili relleno with smoked chicken and sliced avocado. It's a keto-friendly option that's low in carbs and high in fat. And the first time I saw this, I was like, oh, ChatGPT made a mistake. GPT-4 Vision is not that great after all. It makes mistakes just like I do. The chili relleno is filled with corn and mushrooms, but the corn is certainly not keto. So it made a mistake. And then I went back and I looked at it and I realized it said grilled chili relleno. And if you go back to the menu, grilled chili relleno is underneath the chili relleno, and it does not have corn. And so I had actually made the mistake. It had actually had better eyes than I had at that point in time, which is pretty wild. And then I saw this light fixture that I thought was interesting. And I thought, well, I'm going to really test it. So I took a picture of the light fixture and I said, give me a detailed step-by-step plan for creating a DIY version of this light fixture. Also give me a complete list of materials that I will need with identifiers like 1A and 1B and reference them in a step-by-step plan. Now, this problem is so ridiculously hard, I can't even believe it, that this is something that can be solved with computing, and I'll show you the solution in a second. But it has to not only look at the photograph, understand that there's a light fixture there, but understand sort of like the geometry of the light fixture and the materials and what it might be made of, and then think about and decompose that into a plan to go and make the same light fixture at home. That problem is so wildly difficult. And it comes back, and it was a very long plan. It had a list of materials above this, which I've omitted. And it said, take the metal wire 1A and start by shaping it into multiple circles of different diameters. Use the pliers 1B for more precision. Connect the circles together using smaller wire segments to create a similar 3D shape. You can spray paint it. It went through, and it gave me a whole step-by-step, and it clearly understood what was in the photo and had produced a plan to go and build it. Wildly difficult to do. We were going camping that weekend, and a friend had texted me a list of the things I needed to bring because I was responsible for making breakfast burritos. And I'd gone to the grocery store and I thought, well, before we leave, I should take a picture of the things we bought and then cut and paste her text message to me into ChatGPT and say, did I forget anything? So I said, extract an inventory of what we bought. We were going camping and we were asked to make breakfast burritos. Did we miss anything? And it looks and it says, well, you're missing tortillas, you're missing eggs, and you're missing hash browns, which is pretty important if you're missing tortillas and eggs and you're supposed to be making breakfast burritos. So it actually looked at the imagery, it looked at the recipe, it did a comparison between the two, and it spotted what was missing. And it also said bacon is present, assuming the meat in the plastic bag is bacon. You can imagine all of the applications that can now be solved by taking pictures and asking the right question with a model like GPT-4 or Gemini. There's so many different single use cases where, like, for example, one I've heard in hospitals for the longest time, is the patient fallen? Well, that becomes a picture and a question. Is the patient in the bed? Have they fallen, or are they standing up? Or are they in the chair? You can suddenly find out information about what's going on in a location simply by taking a picture and asking questions. You don't have to program some complicated thing. You just have to start asking for the information you want. Is the nurse in the room? Is the nurse doing something with the infusion pump? All of these things become possible. Somebody dropped a catering menu off on my doorstep the other day. And I started thinking about use cases in business. And I thought, man, wouldn't it be great if you could if you needed to order lunch for a bunch of people, just take a picture of the catering menu. And so I tested it out and I said, I need to order lunch for 15 people. And I gave it a fake address for the vendor. I said, create a lunch order for me and draft the email to the vendor. It creates the lunch order, which I think is a pretty good lunch order for 15 people. And if I'd wanted to go iterate on this and, account for different food allergies or preferences, I could easily do that and have it update the order. Another one that I think is great in education that I now use all the time is we write stuff on the whiteboard, and then we have to have somebody who takes notes. Took a picture of a whiteboard, and I say, everyone agrees that we should implement this new grading policy. Please extract the grading policy and draft an email that I can send to the attendees. Extracts the grading policy, formats it nicely, turns it into text, creates an email. I mean, that's simple, basic things that will make a huge difference in the ability to go and do things. I've also got colleagues who are experimenting and looking at, can it look at Scantron, like where you have people that go and fill out and bubble things? And some things it can do and some things it can't, but I bet it things it can't do yet, it's going to quickly improve on. And so suddenly we can go and build applications by having photos collected of the things that we need to extract information from and the right questions attached to those photos. This is a picture of an agenda for a meeting that I took. It was a fake agenda that I created because I wanted to test something. And basically said, this is the agenda for the current meeting. Here's all the attendees and their email addresses. Now I need an agenda for the next meeting. And I need an email to send to the prior attendees with the new agenda. It reads the agenda, writes a new agenda that basically says, we're going to recap what happened. We're going to get an update on implementation. We're going to get, basically what happened since the last meeting. It drafts the agenda and then reads the email addresses off of the page and drafts the email to all of the participants. Now, finally, just to kind of emphasize the power of these models, I'm always kind of looking for what can I give it to break it. And I found this image. It's this finger puppet that's a squirrel that you can buy on Amazon. And so I thought, let's see how good it really is. So I said, how many squirrels were hurt in the making of this photo? ChatGPT, of course, is too smart for me. And it says, it's likely that no squirrels were harmed. The image appears to show novelty or costume finger puppets designed to look like squirrels. Such products are typically made from materials like rubber or silicone. So To do that in traditional computer vision, wildly difficult. So two fundamental things are happening in computing that are really going to change what we can do. One is that these tools have fundamentally new and unique computing capabilities that we did not have before. So like the persona pattern, where you can go and say act as, this ability to go and just take an image and look into it and see things regardless of what the task is that you're asking it to perform on the image. Or the ability to go and generate Pokemon, battle stories to motivate a 9-year-old to eat a dish. Fundamentally new and challenging concepts and capabilities. At the same time, it's completely changing our interface to computing. Before, our interface to computing was primarily GUIs, where you go in and you can only do it if the programmer has put the button there to do it. There's no button there to do it, you don't get to do it. Or if you're a programmer like me, you can go and program whatever you want, but at great time and expensive cost. And this is something fundamentally different. It sits in between. You're not limited by what has been pre-programmed to the same degree. And you can go and do new types of programming where you program just in a prompt itself, or maybe it goes and builds a tool on the fly for you, like we saw when it created the PowerPoint presentation, or maybe goes and generates code like it did for the game at the beginning. But it vastly changes our interface to computing and how we go about solving problems in computing. Now, one of the things that I always sort of think about and talk about with people when I start is a lot of people get upset because they think, well, it's doing all the work, what's the place for humans? And what I think is that you don't want to think about it in terms of artificial intelligence where you're going to replace people. In fact, I have no interest at all in replacing people. What I think is where we should be looking is augmented intelligence, this idea that we augment and amplify human creativity, critical thinking, and problem-solving skills. And I think of it as like an exoskeleton for the mind. You put this thing on, and suddenly you can solve bigger and harder problems than before. I don't want to be replaced by some artificial substitute that we know makes mistakes and wasn't designed from the get-go to give facts and is random to some degree. I think there's a lot of risk there and a lot of problems. But when you put that same capability together with a human in an augmented way, where you're about working together and teaming and augmented intelligence, that exoskeleton for the mind, you can do radically powerful things. And so this is what I think we should be thinking about in terms of these tools and how we should be using them. So I have a quick roadmap for how I think about solving problems in an augmented intelligence way. And I always hate these acronyms, but then I had to come up with one, and then suddenly I like them once I come up with one. So I came up with the ACHIEVE acronym, which I tell people, and this is some basic things that you can use and approaches to make sure you're using these tools in a way that are beneficial. So aiding human coordination, cutting out tedious tasks so you can spend more time thinking and solving hard problems in your head or talking with other human beings, help provide a safety net to make sure things aren't missed. So it doesn't have to do the first draft. Everybody's obsessed with getting it to do the first draft. Another thing it can do is you can give it the first draft that you've produced and have it look and check for errors or spot mistakes. Or I don't want it diagnosing me. I want the doctor doing that, but I sure as heck wouldn't have any problem with it after the fact, looking at the diagnosis or looking at the medications and saying, hey, there might be a potential issue. Safety net is a great use case. Inspiring better problem solving and creativity. This is something that I think is so valuable and so underrated in these tools, is the ability to go off and explore different avenues, options, ways of solving problems. So say, give me 10 different possible solutions, and maybe you see something you hadn't thought about, or go and give it what you're thinking about, how you're thinking about solving the problem, and say, give me other ways of doing this, or critique my solution. Tell me what could be improved. Helping people to think through what they're doing and not just rush to one solution, but to spend time really thinking about solving the problem as opposed to implementing the solution. And then enabling great ideas to scale faster. So this has fundamentally unique computing capabilities that are really wild and allow you to scale certain things up that we couldn't before. So for example, if you take a bunch of surveys and you have a bunch of people who put in free text of what they wanted or what they, whatever their response is to some question, well, the way you had to deal with free text before was you had to have a human read each individual response and try to figure out what to do with it. And often what that meant is those free text responses just didn't get used or got ignored. Well, now you can go and feed them into an LLM and you can scale that idea up of like, let's collect everybody's ideas. And then you can ask the LLM to summarize and dissect them from different angles, which is really, really powerful. So thank you so much for attending this. And I'd be happy to answer any questions you have and also dive into any of the examples that would be helpful in more detail.
Thank you so much, Professor White. We have quite a few questions on the chat. Feel free to unmute yourself and reiterate the questions if you want. Paul?
Yeah. First of all, thank you so much for doing this. This is fascinating. I've looked in this area for a while. First of all, I just have a simple question. Will your slides be made available?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. Second, and your very last point focused on this thought that I've had. I know you come from the field of computer science, but LLMs are somewhat blending CS and neurology, I guess. Given that, are you moving in the direction of thinking about how do humans actually think, and what does it mean, I'm putting in air quotes, to think? And I ask this because you said something in the beginning, ChatGPT reasoned, but then you said computed. And I think there's a subtle but important difference there. What do you think about that difference?
So that's a great question. So I think of it, so when I talk about it, I say reasoned. And some people get upset and they say, it doesn't understand. It doesn't reason. And I say, okay, I'm okay with that. But I think we both have to agree that we gave it input and it computed an output. And so whatever it did, we can both agree it's computing of some side. And so I typically, sometimes what I'll do is I'll say, well, if you don't agree with me on the reasoning perspective, at least we can agree that it's computing something. And if it's computing something, I don't care how it's getting there. If it's it's a building block that I can now use and that I care about. And you said something else, which is like thinking, and one of the things I think that's interesting that's underexplored is how do we teach people to use these things in a way that better engages their thinking? And now I can give you a simple example, but I think there's so much more that could be done. But a simple example of something I tell people is like, if you go to the tool, don't ever ask for one thing. Don't ever ask for one email draft or one, option for solving the problem. Always ask for like 5. And the moment that you have 5 options, you as the human being are forced to think about which one am I going to choose and why. Or then you go and ask it to compare the different options. And what's also interesting is I've seen a lot of people who are really good at solving problems with these tools and prompt engineering. And often the thing that's different is how they approach the problem and how they have the conversation. And so one example of this is there is this guy who's an amazing prompt engineer. His name's Sean Keen, and he is blind, but he produces imagery using DALL-E. And the way he does it, his process that he described to me, which is amazing, is he goes in and he first has a whole discussion of the aesthetics of the image that he wants to create. Like, what would a beautiful image for this concept look like and why? And like has a conversation to explore that. And he builds up all this context about like the aesthetics behind the image. And then he says, okay, now help me generate a prompt for DALL-E to generate an image that has those aesthetics. And then he takes that prompt and he produces several different copies of the image with DALL-E. And then he brings it back into GPT-4. And he said, now here's my aesthetic criteria. Help me to judge these images. And so he goes, so it's a completely different process. And then I learned something from that, which is like, it's really valuable a lot of times when you start the whole conversation with like, what would be the right things that we should have as a good outcome for this? Like, let's discuss what the outcome should be and what it should look like and why before I ever go into the actual, like, doing the thing that I'm trying to get it to do at the end. And it's fascinating. There's all kinds of people who sort of think about it differently, but I haven't seen that explored as much as sort of like, how do you take human interaction and think about using that to teach people?
Very good. Thank you.
Thanks.
Denise?
Hi, I really appreciated your talk. So thank you for sharing with us. My question is kind of around the fact of wondering whether or not we can get statistics on the number of similar prompts to what we might want to put in or what someone else might have put in, and what domains that might have come from, like resumes or what have you.
So I would love to see that data too.
As a teacher, I want to know that.
Yeah. So we've been having this conversation. So one of the things that I lead is building the generative AI platform. It's kind of like a private ChatGPT is the way you can think of it, kind of like a web interface where we allow multiple models to be plugged in. We have about 600 pilot users on campus using it right now. And so one of the questions, of course, that I got like yesterday, and I keep getting, is like, what are the types of tasks that people are using it for on campus? And also, there's two reasons I get that question. Just one, because everybody's curious and they want to know what they always have this secret, like somebody else is probably doing something that I should be doing too, and I just wish I knew what it was. But then there's also from the budgeting perspective of like, what are we getting for our money? You know, like, what is this saving us money or not? And so I think we don't know the answer to that yet. I think we're going to try to collect some information on it. But I know sort of at a high level at Vanderbilt, the types of things that people use it for are everything from job descriptions to, writing, of course, just like emails, all kinds of things like that, reports. I happily used it to help me generate my faculty activity report. I took my CV and I put it in, and then I would take a section at a time and I would say, okay, fill in this section based on what I did in 2023. And it would format it and fill it in. I would fact check it and I'd be like, okay, that's correct. I would go to the next one. And it's like getting the references right and getting all the different little details right, just dumped it in. Perfect. And like, I didn't have to format it. People are using it for meeting agendas planning, event planning, OKRs for like performance, brainstorming, coding, tons of coding usage, all kinds of things.
Yeah, thank you.
Rama?
Well, thank you very much. It was a very interesting talk, and I'm not a computer savvy. I'm a physician, and I've actually created a small website for telehealth in actually India. But as the things progressed, I did a little bit of experimenting on ChatGPT because I was like hoping that I could just integrate it for patients to ask simple questions like, where is the nearest ambulance, or what kind of diet should I order today because I have diabetes. And I'm trying to reach out to people who can help me with that. But initially my question was, is it at all possible? But based on your talk, it looks like it's definitely possible. That's one thing I wanted to confirm. And then second question is like, for people who are not computer savvy like me, is it at all possible to learn learn to not just use, but try to integrate these instructions easy, or it has to be involving programmers?
So great question. So one, I think it's totally doable, but it has to be thought through very carefully from in the healthcare domain. They still make mistakes, from time to time. And especially if you're thinking about something that's going to be open to the end user, it's really hard. There's no way to anticipate all the different types of things they could ask and ways they could ask it. And potentially if they asked it in the wrong way, they could lead to getting the wrong answer. And so you have to be really, really careful in a lot of domains. So there's different techniques to kind of think about how you structure and solve the problem. So like in situations like this, you know, where the answer has to be 100% right. Typically what you want is curated answers, and you want to have it help select which of the curated, you know, already checked answers is correct, just to make sure that there's no mistakes that are made. Now, that's, you know, somewhat unfortunate because then it kind of takes away some of the power and flexibility of them. There are other techniques. There's this technique called retrieval augmented generation. And it's this big complicated sounding technique, which is exactly what computer scientists love to do, is we make these big complex, you know, terms for basically a fairly simple concept, which the concept is that you have a bunch of documents that have the information that you would like it to use as to provide its answer. And you essentially do a search of those documents for potentially relevant passages from the documents. And then you take all those passages and you hand them off to the large language model and you say, answer the question just using this information that I've given you right here. And then it produces an answer based on the information you gave it, or it says, based on the information you gave me, I don't have enough information to answer. And so like that's a typical retrieval augmented generation flow. And so that's another way to try to get at it, is by making sure that it's given information to try to reason on.
So if a patient, so because like in my app, I also have patient data and patient blood work. So if I tell based on my hemoglobin A1C levels in the past 3 months, could you compute a diet for me? Then it probably will think better, because like the hemoglobin A1C is elevated, then it knows that it's diabetes, and then it can spit out the.
Probably. But I mean, like most of these things in the medical domain, it's like, you know, I think that they're so new and everything's evolving so quickly. Like, the moment you get to these use cases, it's so tough because the ramifications are so high if it makes a mistake. I tend to try to steer it towards things that, or problems or use cases where making a mistake is not catastrophic. So like another example of how you might use it in a medical setting is like, give the patient a tool where they can go and say, generate based on my current medical record and what I'm feeling today, give me 10 questions that I should ask my doctor when I see them next time. Or give me, remind me to ask, my doctor about a meal plan. And then the doctor could go and say, okay, well, generate a meal plan based on this person's, current state. And the meal plan gets generated, but hands off to the doctor, and the doctor reviews it and says, yes, that looks reasonable, and then hands it. Or the meal plan gets generated and handed off to the nutritionist who reviews it. So I still think you can do it, but you probably have to have like, the patient a lot of times doesn't have the knowledge to fact check what it's doing, and the risk of harm is high if it makes a mistake. So instead, figuring out ways to where it may not be where we want to get it to eventually, but like it's still an improvement if like the patient knows what to ask coming in. You can quickly generate a meal plan for them, which you probably didn't have time to do during the visit before, but you can quickly generate one and have it quickly looked over and improved, that there's nothing terribly wrong. So I think things like that make sense for now until we've better understood the balance.
Thank you very much.
Minu has related questions as Rama. Minu, do you want to follow up?
Very quickly, Jules. So you mentioned some of this is sort of like, mapping into the persona patterns you mentioned earlier, right? So at this point, what specific persona patterns, would you rely on this tool with ChatGPT on? So what specific ones do you rely on, fairly often, and what you wouldn't rely on?
Yeah. So one of the ones that I think is really powerful, and the first time I heard this being used, was in investment banking, and it was just, I thought, once I heard it, I was like, that's just a great one. And what they said was, we want to take all of our deal documents, and we eventually want to have a private version of ChatGPT or something like it that we can put our deal documents in, and we want to be able to say, act as a skeptic. identify all my assumptions, and challenge them. And we don't want to go into a deal presentation or talk to investors or anything like that, like without having thought through all the assumptions. And this helps us to, basically the thing I loved about this is essentially what she was telling me was like, we as humans have confirmation bias. We have all kinds of biases and we don't know how to get out of them. And this helps us get wider perspective and break through our own human biases by seeing options and seeing other eventualities and thinking about them. So that's a simple one that I think is really, and it's, by the way, it's wildly powerful. You can go into ChatGPT and say, here's my slides, read my slides and act as a skeptic, generate hard questions for me for my next presentation. I told all my PhD students about this in the fall. I was like, you should all do this before your next presentation so you don't feel nervous about what the audience is going to ask you. You will have thought through it. I'm not sure if any of them did it, but that's a great one, I think. I hear lots of examples in industry of somebody thinking, okay, I have this idea, but I've got to go present it to my CIO and my chief information security officer and my CFO. And so I'd like to get like a general CFO perspective, a different general CIO perspective, and sort of have thought through it beforehand. So I think those are some other great examples.
Thank you, Jules.
Thank you. Jaden?
Hi, Dr. White. I'm a current student at the Thatcher School in Ojai, and what Mr. Kumar mentioned was kind of similar to what we were trying to do with our personal AI project, which is trying to identify the partiality of humanities graders, or like the teachers who grade humanities essays. And I was wondering, because we're currently at a roadblock of like quantifying what partiality means. And I feel like some of the sentiments echoed by our English teachers were like they like clear writing. So like they would, for example, give higher points for students who were very clear in their arguments, but like still had poorly resonating arguments. And I was wondering how to quantify that in like a prompt. Like how do you quantify what partiality or like what clear writing means in like the context of an essay?
That's really interesting. So a couple of things. One, it's interesting because I've heard a similar thing done where a group was actually looking at the problem of you have a class, but you have a lot of TAs. You might have 10 TAs in a big class, and they all grade very differently. And so how do you try to ensure consistency between their grading? And so I think there was an ongoing research project where what they were doing is they were taking all of the graders, having them grade the assignments, and then they were going back and they were having essentially GPT-4 perform the same grading using the rubric, and then comparing the difference. Basically, what was the variance of the grader versus GPT-4, and kind of looking at and comparing to GPT-4 as sort of like the ground truth, and finding graders that graded more consistently, with GPT-4 and were closer. It was a very interesting project, and I'm not sure what the outcomes were, but there's been a bunch of projects that have looked at like how well does GPT-4 reflect human perception of like applying a rubric or a grading rubric. So there was one research paper that did this really interesting project where basically they came up with a qualitative like rubric for assessing and critiquing writing, if I remember correctly. And they had humans go and apply that rubric to the writing and write basically their critiques. And then they had GPT-4 do it. And then they showed all the critiques to other humans and asked them to score the critiques. And it turned out that GPT-4 scored higher on the critiques than any of the humans did. So other human beings agreed more with GPT-4 than they did with humans applying the rubric for whatever reason. Now, I don't know how you quantify particularly clarity in these things, but I think maybe one thing that's useful a lot of times is to show examples. So provide it lots and lots of examples. A lot of times the best prompts aren't this long, they're like this long. They have just tons of information in them. And so I think if you have lots of examples of like, this is what we consider clear, this is what we consider like average clarity, this is what we consider unclear, and give it lots of examples. That would probably be the best way of trying to help it understand that. And then have it try to bucket based on, prior examples that you've given it.
Murali?
Yeah, first, thanks. I think this has been fascinating education. My question is about security. How can I make sure what I share or questions that I ask or the output that ChatGPT generates is secure and that doesn't go back into the public knowledge domain?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So I think one answer is that you want to probably have the paid version of things. So I think the free version of things, I mean, I don't know what they're doing behind the scenes. I don't know explicitly, I would read the terms and conditions, but my guess is it's free in exchange for something. And I don't know what the in exchange is. They do say they can use it to train. It's not 100% clear what that means. And I think that's probably unfortunate to some degree that they haven't really spelled out of what it means that they could use your data to help train, because I think it probably doesn't mean what we think. I think it probably doesn't mean that our data could ever end up incorporated into the models, but it's not made a very explicit and clear like it should. If you go to the private, or if you go to the paid side, there's a setting that you can set in ChatGPT that says basically turn off the conversation history. And if you do that, they say explicitly, we will not train on your data and we will not use it in any way. If you use their programmatic interface up front, they say, if you use our programmatic interface, we will not train on your data. And then if you're an institution like Vanderbilt, we have basically the way that we do this is we have, business associates agreements and other legal agreements in place with Microsoft as our provider of OpenAI's, models and services. And so we have an agreement in place that anything we do through them is private. Similar types of things, if you go to AWS and you get Anthropic, you can get similar guarantees. And I'm sure Google's going to have the same thing for Gemini. But as an end user, it's harder, I think, than it should be to go in and say, I want to use the tool. I'm paying you. I don't want anything you do trained on it. It should be very explicit and obvious. And unfortunately, I don't feel like they make it that way,
Yeah, that's unfortunate. It makes one hesitate.
Yeah.
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 Thanks a lot. Thanks for the clarification.
Thanks. Given our time limit, we may only have one or two questions. Priyanka, do you want to restate your questions on the chat?
Yes, I could. I was about to actually ask ChatGPT to answer my question, but I didn't get to that yet. Thank you so much, Jules, for this amazing presentation. This was really mind-blowing for me, and I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
My question was, can ChatGPT do data analysis? So in my specific situation, I was about to take a course in Python and R, and I have been putting it off for a long time. Is this something, can ChatGPT do whatever it is that I want to do? And so I don't need to take these courses anymore. And the second one.
Oh, yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
ChatGPT engage in text analysis or possibly sweep the web for blogs if I want to do some kind of archival data analysis?
So for the first one, there is it used to be a separate tool called ChatGPT Advanced Data Analysis, and it absolutely can do what you're looking for. It used to be that when you went into a separate tool in order to do this. They've merged them all into one tool. So when you go into ChatGPT now through the paid subscription, if you have the Plus subscription and you go in, you can upload an Excel file and you can start asking it to do all kinds of advanced analyses for it. And it'll basically go and write Python code behind the scenes and execute it in order to do that data analysis. And so it depending on the data analysis you want, it can do some really sophisticated things. So I would check it out before diving into R or Python or these things and see if the Plus subscription can get you what you want. It's really like capable in terms of, I can say as a programmer and software engineer, it's very, very capable in terms of like the Python code that it generates to perform all these analyses. That said, like anything else, even when you yourself do analysis, just make sure that you think through like, what are the sanity checks I can perform on the output to make sure that they are consistent with, my expectations. Because like as a programmer, I'm used to this because I don't trust myself. I make mistakes all the time when I code. It can misinterpret what you're asking for, and so you still just have to kind of, you still want to do checks and things like that. For the text analysis at scale on the web, it can do internet searches and then pull in the results of those. So it's possible that you could get it to do internet searches, but I don't know if it would be at the scale that it sounds like you're looking for a large scale. Now, if you had all the blogs, it could certainly go and analyze them. It can certainly probably help do searches to analyze, help identify like possible good blogs to use, but it's not going to be like a massive scale. And part of this is probably because they want to be careful about allowing it to go and do large scale things that could have large impact. So I would suspect it probably isn't going to quite do what you want in terms of going out and doing that, but it certainly can do the textual analysis piece.
All right, thank you so much. And one last question. Do you think the journals would be pretty accepting of data analyzed through ChatGPT?
I think it depends on the journal. And so what we've seen is that like, one of the good things is you can typically save all the code that it generates and things like that. So save it, have it as an appendix. If anybody ever asks, they can have access to it. Save all the original files, have it produce intermediate outputs and save those as files. And then if anybody ever asks, they've got it. And that's kind of like, I think, best practice. Hard to know what people will accept. I'm of the mindset that like soon we'll be in a world where we declare if we did not use generative AI because it's going to be baked into every tool. And so the default is going to be use it, but we're not quite there yet.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate.
I would like to give the last question to Ikwan.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate this education. My wide opening. So Chinwe and I, we are working on a project to empower experiential learning through AI, like using ChatGPT. So both of us teach experiential-based learning classes. So for example, in my class, my student will engage in the Shark Tank event. So they rotate the role play between entrepreneur versus the venture capitalist. And my observation, because they will rotate 2 times throughout the semester, I observed that most of the students kind of fail in their first time, especially when they serve on the other side of the table serving as a judge, because they never had that experience. So we were so excited. Today's teaching really is what we need. So my question is, I learned from today that we can fit ChatGPT with PowerPoints, text, and then ask them, okay, so critique me like a venture capitalist. So my question is, can we fit ChatGPT with presentation instead of students just typing up the question and their presentation or PowerPoint, but they shoot a video of their 3 minutes presentation and ChatGPT based on the way they pace, they speak, and then their reaction, and give them feedback?
That's a great question. So I don't think you can do it with ChatGPT, but Google Gemini looks like it can do it. I don't know. Now, so whether or not it can do an effective critique, I don't know, but Google Gemini can take video. And so there are all kinds of interesting demos of people using it to do things like taking a video of a bookcase and then having to extract an inventory of all the titles in the bookcase. But this is a really great idea because I think that would be really interesting to see if it can critique based on the presentation. But I think that's a Google Gemini task and not a ChatGPT task.
Okay, I will explore that. Thank you.
Please let me know. Email me if it works. I'd love to see that.
Okay.
That's a great idea.
Okay, we will email you our experiment result and see how it works.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor White. This is such a enlightening and engaging session, and we truly appreciate your time. We will be sure in touch with you because Equa and I, we are working on the pedagogical approach and trying to kind of train, one type of AI tools now to help us run the Shark Tank role plays in all the in-class exercises.
Oh, very cool. Very cool. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you all for joining us today.
Yeah.
Have a great weekend.
Thank you. It was wonderful.
Thank you, Chen Wei and Minu, for inviting him. That is so great.